Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Have you ever experienced a moment where everything you've known, everything you've worked for, everything you thought you were, crumbles in the blink of an eye? Imagine waking up one day and discovering you are no longer the person you once were. That's exactly what happens to Gregor Samsa in Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. It's a story about identity, isolation, family, and the heartbreaking fragility of life. Let's dive into this tragic, thought-provoking tale together. When Gregor Samsa awakens one morning, something feels off. He feels sluggish, as though he's trapped in a dream. His limbs, once familiar and responsive, are heavy and alien. He struggles to move, trying to pull himself out of bed, but it's as if his body has betrayed him. His first reaction isn't horror, it's confusion and frustration. He's a traveling salesman, and the first thought that crosses his mind is, I'm going to be late for work. It's a testament to the kind of person Gregor is, someone who identifies himself solely through his role as the family provider. Work is his life, his sense of worth, his identity. Everything about him is anchored in that daily grind. Even in the face of an impossible transformation, his concern is about his job, his responsibilities. But as Gregor tries to get up, it's clear something much deeper has happened to him. His body has transformed into a grotesque insect, his once human form unrecognizable. His limbs are no longer his own. He can no longer stand up and walk like he used to. His very sense of self begins to shatter. At this moment, panic begins to creep in. He can't move. He can't function. And yet, his first thoughts are not of the horror of his new form, but of his family's reaction, of his boss's expectations, of the pressing need to fulfill the role he has always played. Gregor tries to call out to his family, but his voice is no longer human. It's a shrill, incomprehensible noise. His body has betrayed him in every way. The frustration and helplessness he feels are overwhelming. He can't even explain to his family what's happening to him. He can't reach out. He can't communicate. And he can't fulfill his duties. The isolation begins almost immediately. When his family starts knocking on the door, asking why he hasn't woken up, Gregor is desperate to explain, but his efforts only increase the distance between him and them. They are frightened, unsure of what to make of the strange noises coming from his room. Gregor's mother, who should be a source of comfort, becomes part of the overwhelming alienation he feels. She screams, her voice filled with horror, at the sight of him. His father is angry, as if Gregor has purposefully chosen to transform into a monster and ruin everything. Greta, his younger sister, becomes the only one who attempts to care for him. At first, there's still a sense of familial duty. She brings him food and cleans his room. But, as the days pass, Gregor feels the emotional distance growing. Greta, once the person who cared most for him, begins to see him less as a brother and more as a burden. His transformation, while physical, is mirrored by the emotional distance that's starting to grow between him and the people he once loved and trusted. As Gregor spends more time in his room, isolated from his family, his feelings of loneliness deepen. He watches them from his window, trying to understand how they are coping. His longing to be part of their world again is palpable. He craves human connection. Something as simple as a conversation, a comforting touch. But the longer he is in his new form, the more they push him away. His family no longer sees him as a son, a brother, or a man. They see only a thing to be feared, a thing to be locked away. Gregor's growing emotional distress is amplified when his father, enraged by his presence, attacks him with a cane. This act of violence strikes a deep blow to Gregor's already shattered sense of self. The man who once cared for him, who once was a father figure, now sees him as something disgusting and threatening. The pain of this betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound. Gregor, once a devoted son, is now a prisoner in his own home, surrounded by people who have turned into strangers. His attempts to reach out, to reconnect, become increasingly desperate. At one point, Gregor makes an effort to leave his room, to move toward his family, hoping to be seen not as a monster, but as a person, someone who still loves them, who still wants to be part of their lives. But when he opens the door, his family recoils in fear, and his father violently drives him back into the darkness of his room. This rejection, this complete abandonment, sends Gregor into an emotional tailspin. He begins to realize that his family is no longer capable of seeing him as human. To them, he has become something that must be hidden away, something to be ignored and forgotten. His heart aches with the weight of this realization. The person he once was, the person who had dreams, desires, and a deep love for his family, no longer exists. He is reduced to an insect, a mere nuisance that must be dealt with. As time goes on, Gregor's physical condition begins to worsen. His body becomes weaker, his movements slower. But it is the emotional weight of his isolation that breaks him. He no longer wishes for anything other than to be accepted again, to be seen as human once more. Yet, his family is moving on without him. They no longer need him. They have taken in boarders to make up for the financial burden his transformation has caused. They are no longer concerned with his well-being. They are concerned only with their own survival. Gregor, now physically and emotionally spent, begins to wither away. His body becomes a shell of what it once was. He is no longer capable of doing anything but existing in his room, a mere shadow of the person he used to be. And yet, he still clings to the hope that somehow, someone, his family, his sister, anyone, will recognize his humanity and offer him a sign of kindness, a reminder that he is still loved. But that sign never comes. The moment of Gregor's death is tragic, not because of the loss of a man, but because of the loss of his humanity, his identity, and his relationships. When Gregor dies, his family feels relief. They no longer have to care for him. They can now move on with their lives. His death, which should have been a moment of mourning, is instead seen as an escape from the burden of his existence. Kafka's The Metamorphosis is not just a story about a man who turns into an insect. It's about the way society, and even our own families, can discard us when we no longer serve a purpose. It's about how easily people are forgotten when they are no longer useful. Gregor's transformation is a mirror of the alienation that many people feel in their own lives, the isolation that comes when we lose our sense of identity, when we no longer fit the mold that society or our families expect us to. Gregor's story is a heartbreaking exploration of how easily a person can become invisible to the people around them. It's a tragic reminder of how fragile our connections with others are, and how quickly they can be broken. The emotional devastation that Gregor experiences is not just about his physical transformation. It's about the emotional pain of being abandoned by those he loved and trusted. And that's the devastating journey of Gregor Samsa in The Metamorphosis. Kafka's tale forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about identity, family, and the consequences of losing our humanity. If this summary resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into powerful stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.